All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney Podcast. My name is Nathan Chaney, and I'm the tour guide here today and every day on the Supply Chaney Podcast. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the softer side of supply chain, that being the people that make supply chains and businesses hum. And specifically, I've got Larry Solomon on today, who is a specialist, or maybe you might almost say expert in this space. He's written a book, so that means to me he must be pretty smart. And so he's chiming in today to kind of help share some wisdom and knowledge on the people leadership and change management side of supply chain. So, Larry, thanks for joining today and sharing some of your expertise and experience. I'm going to hand this digital microphone over to you for a couple of minutes and let you introduce yourself a little bit more.
Well, thank you, Nathan. Thank you for the opportunity. You did mention the softer side. I think many of the listeners would agree that which we call the softer side is actually often the hardest to wrestle with, which is how do you effectively mobilize your people behind your agenda, behind your goals. Yeah, so I've had the privilege of a really blessed career in 3 different continents. As you can hear from my accent, I come from the very deep South. That's South Africa. But I've been in the US for over 26 years. So I'm proud to be an American and proud to be a Texan. So yeah, my background just started off as a commercial artist, the graphic design. So I still use my artistic skills, which I can talk a little bit about later, how you can actually use art to help with the engagement of people. But then I got married, had kids, and realized, no, a suffering artist is not going to be able to put his kids through college. So I then moved into the business world. I had the privilege of being in sales, operations, labor relations, HR, but I've always gravitated back to the people discipline because I have a real passion for people. I think we fail to understand the huge potential of our people at every level in the organization. And I believe the good Lord created us as incredible beings, and often our potential is thwarted or limited by poor leadership and self-doubt. So leaders who can actually release the potential of their people can truly create a sustainable competitive advantage through people. So that's what I love to focus on. That's my passion. I still keep my art. I do sculpture and chainsaw sculpting and a number of other things to keep me out of mischief. And I've still got all my 10 fingers. Thank the Lord for that. But I'm really passionate about helping organizations unlock the potential of their people.
You know, I think it's quite timely that we have this conversation as well because of the emphasis, I think, in the business world on the not people side of business. And I feel like we might be getting a little bit distracted by the shiny objects and the servers and the computers and stuff. And that we do need to keep our eye on the ball, and that ball being people. And so I'm excited to kind of unpack a little bit more here on the topic. But before we do, I like to dive into a little bit of the detail, like kind of bring out the family photo album, if you will, of your story and your history of growing up. And it sounds like maybe that was in South Africa.
Yeah, mostly in South Africa. Yes.
What was that like? Can you tell us, what were you like as a child? Were you the studious one, the troublemaker? What were you up to?
No, I was a terrible student. I was into sport. That's what I was into. And, yeah, I got up to mischief, some of it, which I wouldn't be willing to share on the on the podcast. No, I had a great upbringing, great life. I was really blessed. I grew up in an interesting time in South Africa, and was there with the release of Mandela and the formation of the new South Africa. So those were very interesting and joyful times. I had an opportunity to go with Cadbury Schweppes to London on a 3-year assignment to head up organizational development for the company. Cadbury Schweppes at that time was about a 50,000 employee company with 55 businesses around the world. And so it was a huge opportunity to go to the head office and head up organizational development for the company. We were planning on going back to South Africa, where they said, no, we need you in Dallas. to head up HR for the Dr. Pepper company, which had been acquired by Cadbury. And so I came to Dallas thinking that I'd be here for a couple of years. And that's 26 years ago, and went through an absolute roller coaster of experiences with the company, but fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So that's a little bit about me. I'm married, got two beautiful kids, 5 grandkids. And so, yeah, no, life is good.
Tell me what those early experiences in your career, and maybe from an education perspective, what were your earliest sort of career experiences like?
Well, I spoke about creativity. I remember, it's interesting that you mentioned South Africa. One of my earliest experiences of how to effectively mobilize people was in the midst of strike activity in the height of apartheid, where many of the labor force in South Africa realized that the only way they could overthrow the apartheid government was to try and cripple industry. And so strike activity in South Africa was rife. I mean, we were losing a lot of manufacturing time, production time. And I remember one of the shop stewards coming to me, and I had a good relationship with the people. And he said, look, I just got to tell you, I trust you, but I want you to know that next Monday and Tuesday, we will not be at work. We are on a national strike. But I'm telling you because I respect you and I know you respect me. And so I had to come up with a creative solution. And the creative solution was, how do we honor the fact that they need to strike? Because I said to them, I agree with you. This government needs to change. But I think we also agree, I said to the shop steward, that we don't want to destroy the business for our livelihood. And so I discussed a concept with him where we could come in on the weekend and work the weekend before at normal rates, and then take the Monday and Tuesday off as vacation. And then I went to my boss and I said to him, this is what we'd like to do. He thought I was a loony. But I said, not only do I want that to happen, I want us, the management, to come in on the weekend and put on overalls and work for our people on the production lines. Let them show us how to run a bottling line. Let them show us how to build a pallet of product. And we did that, and it was absolutely fantastic because it humbled leadership and office staff to realize how tough it is to work in an un-air conditioned factory, and it built tremendous bonds between us and our people. So there's always a creative solution if you are willing to explore and trust and believe in your people.
I appreciate you sharing that story. And I've been thinking about, some presentations and things I need to give, and I've been thinking about it. And I think that I want to ask the crowd sometimes, like, do you ever think about business like math, like a math problem, that there's always a solution? There's multiple ways to arrive at a solution. And I think that's one of the fun things about business, is that you can be creative as much as it's kind of business and there's supposed to be a certain way to do it. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to solve problems and be creative in a way that you can create win-win situations for as many people as possible.
Absolutely. It's learning to find the common ground and build on that.
Yes. So talk a little bit more about then. So from that time and your time in London, can you talk a little bit about what it was like moving countries and kind of having a new culture and environment to operate in?
Yeah, interesting. You moved from South Africa, which was a British colony, and you moved to England, and you are not expecting a huge cultural shift. So your guard is down. But it was a very significant cultural shift, to be honest.
Any examples?
If you're going to go to China, for example, or whatever, there's going to be a massive cultural shift. So you prepare yourself. But when you move to a country that speaks almost the same language and you have some heritage, you're not expecting the shift in culture. So, yeah, very much a more indirect culture as opposed to the directness of South Africans. So it was quite a challenge.
I see. And, we touched on the fact that, a while ago that you've kind of always been in the business of being in the consumer packaged goods, the physical items where there's a lot of supply chain involved
Yeah,
in for me being a supply chain fan. I think that every company is a supply chain company, even if you're making chocolate or Coke or whatever it might be.
absolutely.
Um, but from your perspective, from kind of the HR and people side of things, how do you see every company as an HR department or as a people company? How do you kind of frame business?
No, I've always said to my HR teams that I've led that they need to be business people first and HR specialists second, unless you're an HR company, which most companies are not. And HR needs to be there to support leaders in the execution of their roles. And for some people, that was quite a challenge. Our business is not about the HR department. It's a service function enabling businesses to be more efficient, more effective, and maximize the impact of their human capital, which, as we know, is for many companies the biggest expense or investment on the income statement or balance sheet is that their people. Your people investment is huge. And the question is, what return on investment are you getting on that massive investment? And so that's what great HR should be doing, is effectively mobilizing people to tap into their untapped potential and maximize the return on investment, both for the company and for the people themselves in terms of their growth, their sense of achievement, and obviously their rewards.
Speaking of people and motivation and all that sort of stuff, my favorite probably quote when it comes to people and leadership and development is and you definitely know the story, but it's like this kind of anecdote of the CFO looking at talking to the executive, the CEO or something like that, and saying, oh my gosh, what if we take all this money and we pour into our people to develop them and educate them and train them, and then they leave. And then the executive responds back, well, imagine if we don't invest in them and do not develop them and they stay. That is, for me, it's just one of those. It's on or off. It's very black and white. What's your viewpoint on developing people in your team, knowing that eventually some of them may move on to other careers and they may not spend 30 years with your organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, if you look at Jack Welch, Jack Welch had the same problem. People go through the GE management and they would leave. And he was often challenged with that same question. He said, look, I'd rather just keep developing people. And you know what? And on a macro scale, if I'm building the leadership capability within the US or within my environment, that's part of my social responsibility too. But I do think there's another side to training and development. A lot of companies do a lot of training for training's sake. And I think that's a waste of money. I think one has to have an accountability with training. So if I send you on some program to develop your particular skill set, I want to know how that's going to be implemented back in the workplace for two reasons. One, there should be a return on the investment. And secondly, your real learning doesn't happen in the classroom. Your real learning happens in application. 80% of learning happens in the doing, not in the theory. So yeah, I'm very committed to training and development, but I'm very focused on a business-like approach to investment in people.
Which I guess in the three-letter acronym for that is ROI of
Yeah,
some sort
there
of.
should be an ROI in everything we do. Everything needs to be approached from a business perspective.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I think a lot of HR people struggle with that. And so getting HR to come to the table with a business mindset, I think, is just one of my personal challenges in life.
Yeah. And you have, like every other function in business or supporting role in a company, you have levers at your disposal of benefits and compensation and culture and all these sort of things. Can you kind of talk a little bit about, from your experience, some of these levers that you've used, and suggestions on how people should use them, to motivate and inspire and grow their business?
Well, I would say that while incentives are great, what we fail to do as an organization is respect the intellectual capabilities of our often what we would like to call blue collar employees. People on a production line, as I always like to say to people, who is the best person to solve a problem on a production line? Some head office guy with a suit, a consultant, or the dude or dudess who's been working on that production line for 20 years. Why do we not tap into that knowledge? Because I think part of rewarding people is giving them a sense of dignity, respecting their intellectual capital, enabling and empowering them to make a difference. And yes, you can support that with rewards and incentives. But more important, the gold that is in leaders' hands that they leave, or the diamonds that they leave lying on the floor, is recognition and the empowerment of their people and tapping into their years of experience. So I think, to me, that is the big missed opportunity.
I like it. Let's turn that a little bit to the times that we live in today, which is very tech focused, and there must be a automatic a button that you can push to solve this problem, and automation and computers and machine learning and AI is going to solve the day. How's your perspective on kind of this evolution that we're seeing in introduction of technology into every facet of business these days?
Well, I think if you look at even prior to the AI move and whatever, if you look at the research done by Towers Watson, their research on employee engagement, and the definition of engagement, the technical, quote, technical definition of engagement is Nathan, does he believe in the vision and direction of the organization to the point where he's willing to put in extra effort? That is the measure of engagement. And engagement levels worldwide, and the US is no better, ranges between 30 and 35%. Think about that. I mean, that's like you got 60 to 65% of your people who are basically not engaged. In other words, they're not willing to put in the extra effort. They don't believe necessarily in the vision and direction of the organization. And so if we start with that low percentage of engagement, we start becoming even more and more complacent and more comfortable with, well, technology will solve our problem. We don't really need people. I think we're in for a tough ride. And I also would say the counter to that is organizations who leverage the power of IT but continue to engage and mobilize their people will have a truly competitive advantage. I think if your business is one that requires people, you need to engage and mobilize your people. And no technology is going to be able to do that for you.
So based on that answer, I'm taking it that and you've been around in the business world to see different technologies being introduced and the evolution of just ways of engaging and conducting business. So I would imagine that you would be in the camp that technology and AI and stuff is a tool and an enabler and a leverage to help an organization improve and people individually to improve their productivity and contribution, and not necessarily a replacement for people, because so many people are, like when Excel spreadsheets first came out, I think I heard all the accountants said, oh no, we're all going to be out of a job because Excel
Absolutely.
spreadsheets are here. And it sounds like we're just hitting repeat on that playbook now when it comes to AI.
Yes, I think so. And I mean, you make a really good point, because all these tools are going to do is raise the bar for all of us. So, if you're an operator on a production line and there's a lot of manual stuff you did in the past, if you embrace technology, you'll become a more proficient and more effective performer. You'll be able to raise your performance leveraging technology. It doesn't really matter what your role is. And I've just seen incredible examples of the power of people achieving what people never thought was possible, just because you unlock their potential and you create an environment where they were empowered to make a difference.
Let's kind of move over to the part of the conversation where we talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts and the day to day of what you do today as a business operator. who is your ideal customer? What kind of services do you provide?
So yeah, at Solomon People Solutions, we focus on small to mid-sized businesses um, who are generally people, not people heavy, but do depend on their people for the execution of their product or their service. And what we work with leaders to do is to find ways to effectively create that competitive advantage through their people by effectively mobilizing their people behind a change agenda. Now, that change agenda could be, and I'll give you some examples. In some cases, it's like we just need to sharpen our culture. Our culture is a little bit apathetic, or we don't have enough accountability, so we want to change the culture of the organization. So we would come in and help them define what those cultural characteristics are and work with them to mobilize their people behind that and translate. This is the key word I want to add here. How do you translate the goals or the vision of the organization into the day-to-day activities of every employee? So sometimes it's culture. Sometimes it could be a joint venture, an acquisition on a macro scale. It could be we're introducing a new software system and we've got to get people on board. So it could be macro or micro, but we know change is messy. It's always messy, but it doesn't have to be chaotic. So what we do is we come in and work with leaders to intelligently design the change implementation. Effective change is never a result of evolution. It has to be intelligently designed and then adapted along the way because it is messy. But it's like a battle plan. You have a battle plan. It never actually materializes exactly as you plan, but at least you have a plan which you can adapt and alter along the way. And on that point, I use the word translate. The biggest compliment I ever had in my career was with my boss at Dr. Pepper Snapple, Larry Young, who was recognized as CEO of the year. He said to me one day, he says, "I can sum you up in one word." I thought, okay, that could be good or bad. And he said, "You're my translator." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" He said, "Well, I've got all these thoughts, these ideas that I want to drive in the business. How do I get 20,000 people in the Dr. Pepper Snapple group to passionately embrace this and know what it means in their roles?" So that was my job, translating that to the organization, and then equally translating back to leadership the heartbeat of the organization. What's happening in the trenches? What's the heartbeat of the people? What are some of the things leadership need to be aware of? So that two-way translation is a critical role in an organization. So we help organizations with the effective translation of strategies and goals into the day-to-day actions of every employee.
I would love if you could share either a success story or a kind of a oops moment where something was going awry within an organization and you all came in, worked your magic, and kind of talked through what you walked into, what you're able to accomplish through that engagement, and then come out the other side. In any sort of just really tangible type stories. I would love if we could.
Well, I did write a book. I wrote a book called Translate, Motivate, Activate, which is a leader's guide to mobilizing change. And in here, I cover a whole bunch of examples. I'm going to give you an example now, but I just want to mention that I've got the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've made some big screw ups as well, and I've learned from them. And then I've had some great successes. So let me give you an example of a supply chain success, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. So we introduced lean management with Kaizens in Dr. Pepper Snapple. And as you know, most lean initiatives fail, not because they're bad. It's just because they fail to mobilize people behind the why and how they can actually contribute to this lean journey. So in one of our production lines, the Snapple production line, we had a real issue. Well, as you know, in supply chain, inventory is a killer. And soft drink industry is no different because you've got aging stock, you've got impulse purchase. So it's very difficult to accurately forecast and keep your inventory levels low while at the same time maintaining a 99.9% customer service level. And so as a consequence of that, we tended to carry too much inventory. So we mobilize our people and say, look, we need to find ways to drive down our inventory. And Snapple production line was a good example. The team on the Snapple production line realized the way they can help inventory is to challenge product changeover times. Because if you're changing from a peach to a strawberry and it takes you X number of hours, you're always carrying inventory as a backup for changeover times. And so our current changeover time at that time on the Snapple line was about 3.5 hours, because you have to flush the lines, it's fruit, it's sanitization, etc., etc. We let these people loose through a Kaizen, a 5-day Kaizen, and said, right, what we want you to do is find a way to fundamentally change that. And this team of operators got together and they adopted a mindset like a Formula One changeover in the pits, where that car comes screaming in and within a few seconds it's been refueled, the tires are changed, whatever, and the thing is out. They had that mindset and they said, how do we adopt that mindset with our changeover? And so they came up with numerous ideas. Simple ideas like quick release catches instead of nuts and bolts, having a filter that was pre-sanitized and pre-checked by QC, standing ready in a sanitized environment so that when the line stopped, they could rip out the old filter and shove in a pre-sanitized one. They found ways to speed up the flushing of the lines, and they took it from 3.5 hours to less than 30 minutes. So when you start doing that across your entire manufacturing, we were able to significantly reduce inventory. And I'll give you a hard measure. Dr. Pepper Snapple was able to reduce its warehouse footprint by over 1 million square foot. 1 million square foot. I remember going into some of these warehouses. It's like an echo chamber because we obviously had leases that were waiting to expire. And so we had the shrinking inventory, yet our customer service levels were 99.9. Why? Because we empowered our people to focus on one of the major drivers of inventory, which is changeover times. And so that I use that as an example. And it wasn't consultants. It wasn't head office. It was our people on the production line being let loose with their years of experience and expertise and an opportunity to be creative. So I think that's probably a good example.
I love that example because it's so tangible. I can taste the peach flavor in my mouth.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
I'm curious if you could share a little bit about maybe obstacles that you all are seeing in today's business environment, like what, over different decades and geographies and types of businesses, problems come and go, I guess. And there's motivation, or there's turnover, or there's instability in the culture. I don't know, like what's kind of like the main sort of pain point, I guess, that you're seeing in organizations these days when it comes to their people?
Yeah, I know it sounds a little trite, but we've heard the statement is people don't leave organizations, they leave their leaders. I mean, people don't say, I'm changing companies because I really don't like a particular product. Yeah, there might be a few people who are offended by a product, but most people leave because, in fact, the number one reason why people leave organizations is not compensation. It's a failure to be recognized, number one. Number two is no sense of progress in the organization, no future. And then thirdly comes compensation. So I think, once again, it's in leaders' hands, the ability to recognize the talents of their people. That, to me, is the biggest obstacle. And in fact, there's an organization called the Corporate Leadership Council who've done some interesting research on the degree to which employees are effectively engaged and enabled. And enabled means aligned, the degree to which they understand how they can contribute to the strategies. In other words, translated. To what degree have leaders translated the goals of the organization into the day-to-day activities of the employees? And the percentage is 10%. So I think one of the biggest challenges, corporations are really good at coming up with strategy statements and vision statements and stick them all over the wall in every office. And you get your little tchotchkes with your mug with your little logo on and pens. But what does it mean for the forklift driver? What does it mean for the accounts clerk? A failure to translate. I think as leaders is our biggest failure, is the failure to translate. Can every person in your organization, first of all, do they understand the goals and visions of the organization? And secondly, can they articulate what they are doing differently now to contribute either directly or indirectly to those goals? If they can't answer that question, you have failed to translate. So to me, that is a massive obstacle.
I like it. That's it's very concrete, and I think that people can relate to that. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on leaders. Are they born or are they made?
That's a great question. I mean, one of the greatest leaders I worked with in London, who I still respect, and he's always been a mentor in my life, is the quietest, non-assertive individual you could ever meet. And then you have other people who like Larry Young, I mentioned earlier, who is charismatic, outgoing. So I think we fall into a trap in thinking that to be a leader, you got to be bubbly and charismatic and whatever. I believe it comes down to your values and your belief in people. If you do not believe in people, you can go on any leadership course you like, you'll never be a leader because people will see right through you. If you believe in your people and you're willing to have the courage to trust them, to invest your time in them and put them ahead of yourself in terms of servant leadership, you can become a leader. But I think that comes back to your core values and your belief in people. If you have that, I think you can make leaders. If you don't have that, you can, as I said, you can go to Harvard. You're still not going to be a good leader because your failure to believe in your people will be very transparent very quickly.
Maybe let's talk about that from the perspective of that forklift driver or that production line worker that does progress and spend an entire career with a company and moves up to the president, role. How does that? How can companies or people, take it from whichever side you like, help make sure that happens and that there is that future for the individual? Either that they create themselves by self training and educating themselves and moving themselves up the ladder, if you will, or the company makes sure that they are growing their future leadership bench from the shop floor up. Any insights on that?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, I think that one of my little philosophies is that the human mind is a magnificent creation limited only by self-doubt and poor leadership. So everyone has potential. Now, we've got to be realistic. Not everyone wants to be the CEO. Some people really want to be the best forklift driver they could be. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because we need those people. But wherever they are, how do you help them be the best that they can be? And that means understanding your people and understanding where they see themselves going. It's interesting you mentioned from forklift driver to CEO. Larry Young is a good example, CEO of Dr. Pepper. He started as an assistant on a truck. He wasn't even a driver. He just assisted the driver on the truck. And he became president and CEO in his journey. So it is possible if people can tap into their untapped potential. I think it's, to answer your question directly, I think it's giving people an opportunity, being honest in your feedback to people. For some people, we can have delusions of grandeur, and often it's because we haven't been given constructive feedback. And it's just giving them an opportunity to grow and knowing where they see themselves going. and helping them get there.
Well, Larry, I think we could continue on here for a good bit because the concept of people and leadership and change management is an ongoing conversation that will never be removed from the boardroom of any business. But maybe just for today, any last words of wisdom or thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with before we adjourn for today?
That's a good question. Yes, I know it's sounding repetitive, but if there's one thing I would ask every leader to ask themselves, look in the mirror and ask themselves, the people under their control. If you or I walked into that factory or that operating area and walked up to people at every level, could they clearly articulate the goals or the vision of the organization? And equally importantly, can they articulate what they are doing in their day-to-day jobs to contribute to those goals or vision? That's a lead indicator. Lag indicator will obviously be great business results, but unless you are able to effectively mobilize your people behind this agenda, you're never going to tap into their untapped potential.
I love it. I love it. Thanks for that. And thanks for your time today, Larry. I appreciated all being a native Texan and the fact that Dr. Pepper is the official drink of Texas. I appreciated hearing a little bit about it from behind the scenes and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. May I just finish one last comment?
Sure. Uh-huh.
By empowering people at Dr. Pepper, 20,000 people, we were able to take a share price when we went public in 2008 from $12.90 something cents to over $104. And that was really, obviously, a lot of respect to the leadership of the organization, Larry Young's leadership. But he'd be the first to admit it was the empowering of 20,000 employees to make a difference that startled the stock market, actually. They didn't believe we could do it because Coke and Pepsi had tried and were not able to achieve what we did with the fully integrated business. But the power of people was what really made the difference. So I'd encourage people to take a deep breath and think about to what degree have they unlocked their people's potential.
I like it. I like it. Have a good rest of your day, Larry.
Thank you for your time.